Oh, did it say, give you a choice of cloud
Cloud
or
computer,
what'd you put?
computer, you want cloud?
No, I want computer.
Great.
Last week I hit cloud by accident. Well, all the find it is. Oh, no, did I lose that whole thing? I did. So, did that, am I on the picture?
Yes. It's so clear. You need this, here, Alan. Yeah.
It's only one that they start interfering, so.
That's one.
So after the break, we're gonna go out in the patio and work with insulation. We can roll that out there and
Alright,
take the camera and see if we can get some. But here's Robin, I guess we can start, huh?
Let's start from this here.
Yeah. So, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna look at, the handout, and then we're gonna, look at some videos on insulation. And then we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna go outside and carry some tips on insulation, which some of you may already know, but the important stuff. And then if there's any time left, we'll come back in and talk about, advanced framing. Has Ken talked about that in the classes yet?
he's touched on it, yeah.
So we'll do that and then maybe talk about passive houses. Passive houses is kind of what we're doing both semesters, so it's not critical that we do it today. We're not going to start off. Okay, so that first handout, it says heat physics on the top, is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So one of the things that really changed building for builders and people who write about building, realizing that there was a whole science of physics and heat transfers that building wasn't really paying attention to, which for good reason. But they realized that that was probably having something to do with buildings not being insulated or warm. So then we started studying that. And then I always looked on building now, or green building, you see a lot of stuff on heat theory and heat transfer. A lot of it is wrong, unfortunately. And it doesn't affect us too much. We'll go over what I think is the better way of looking at it. But we'll end up just talking about insulation. But it's good to know what's behind insulation. So there's a definition of heat in physics. It's kinetic energy. It's a couple of things. You know, it's like every word or concept. There's many aspects to it. But heat is that. Technically, heat is what your body feels. The senses on your body feel heat. And before they feel it, it's not really heat. It's usually kinetic energy. It's usually motion of molecules. Or could be radiation, none of which are hot in themselves, but when they touch the human body, we sense it as heat. So in that first thing on the heat physics, the things to know are that the kinds of the way heat transfers, the way heat moves around the building. So, and this is pretty typical of these three. I've never seen a book that didn't use these three, but they don't always define them correctly. So radiation is the first one, and again, radiation is not heat transfer; it's just radiation, right? So, but everything radiates. Most of the radiation we experience in our life is from the sun, but every piece of matter radiates. So your body is radiating energy right now. It's just you can't use it too much. Although in passive homes they use that. We're looking at. There's actually more radiation than you think, and it can contribute to heat if house is really tight. But mostly we get heights. Mostly we get heat from the sun, obviously. How about, another kind of radiant heat after the sun? In homes? Anybody got an idea?
Appliances,
What?
appliances, or stores.
Well, yeah, appliances, but fireplaces, when you burn wood, that heat that comes, that's radiant heat. Because it sends radiation across that hits your body and feel like heat. And stoves will do that. Okay, so that's radiation, and we'll talk about it more in terms of what it does inside a wall and in respect to insulation. The second one, conduction, is really the main transfer of heat. And that's, usually they say it has to do with solids, but actually every type of matter, solid or water, liquid or gas, they all conduct heat. So that means that what that is in physics is the molecules and the atoms in the solid or wet thing get agitated from heat from the outside, and they start moving faster. So that's really what heat is these molecules moving faster. And when they move fast, they start hitting the molecules next to them and the substance next to them, and they heat those up. So it conducts from one thing to another. It could be solid, it could be liquid. So if you have a pan on a stove and you've got some heating unit underneath it heating it, that flame comes up and hits the pan, and the pan gets hot, right? But then if you've got liquid in that, like with boiling water, that heat transfers to the liquid, and that's conduction. Because the molecules just start speeding up and everything around them. And then the third one that you should talk about is called convection. You heard all these? Some of you have heard these before, right? It's pretty standard science stuff in lower education. And convection involves fluids, but not just liquid, but not just air, but it could be water too. So when ice melting from a glacier, which is happening now, unfortunately, when it goes into the warmer water, then you get convection. You get the warmer water kind of rises to the top, but it affects the water. So that's. Did you have anything to add?
No, I have a question for after.
Okay, good.
Heated floors, what type of heat transfer would that be? Induction?
I think it would be conduction, but it would also be radiation, because they would radiate up. And that's why they can use them they use them to heat rooms too, even though they're on the floor. And if they heat the air above it and that air moves, and convection's involved too, so that was really all through.
Okay.
The thing that makes it unique is the conduction, because they're made so you can walk on it. It's not a cold floor, so that heat's conducted, so it feels warm to your feet. The fact that it heats the room is secondary, because you can heat the room in many other ways. So, but in cold places, that conduction from the floor is really nice to have. Here it doesn't matter. Anybody got heated floors in their house? Yeah, it's not a big thing in a climate like this. Because it's not, the floors aren't cold enough, right? But if you live in Colorado and the Rockies, it might be a nice thing to have. Some people have them in the bathroom, so when they get out of the shower. They have tile usually, it's not freezing.
I mean,
They
it's
have,
split tile, that's at least a little warm.
Yeah.
They took you long,
Shower
just
too,
when the,
right?
you're gonna pop, any of the light gets in, I need to.
I always rather just put on a pair of slippers, $19.
That's what I've been cleaning. for the last few
Radiant
days.
floor heating
Cold
and
tomorrow.
thousands and thousands. Yeah, but people like the comfort somehow. Okay, now let's look at how those three things work in a house. So we talked about one thing, Jacob brought up radiant floors. But just in terms of radiation, like say you have a wood stove or a fireplace that's putting out heat, that's going to send out energy. And they call it heat, but it's really just energy, radiant energy, until it hits something. So it could hit the sheetrock, it could hit the walls, and then that would cause the walls to heat up. Because it's energy, right? Radiation. So as soon as it hits something, it starts those molecules moving too. And then usually after radiation hits something, then it conducts from there onto everything else that's against it, you know? So radiation can hit the walls, or windows, it can go to windows. Conduction goes from the sheetrock to the studs, right? And out, the studs all, it's just heating that, it's just, agitating the molecules on, it's not contained, so it goes all the way through the wall. That's why that's what, thermal braking, you heard of that? Anybody? So one of the big concepts in green building and building performance and building science is stopping the conduction so that heat doesn't leave your house. And the main way heat conducts is through the stud, right? Because it goes from sheetrock, stud, plywood, sheathing, siding, and out of the building. So they want to put a brake, they call it a thermal brake. It breaks the thermal progress. So if you have an ordinary house that's just got sheetrock, stud, and insulation between the studs, sheathing, siding outside, there's nothing that stops it. It keeps going in and out. So the new building wants you to put rigid foam insulation outside that covers over the stud. So there's no passageway that heat can conduct out. So that's a huge concept. And in passive house, it's a must. I mean, it's like, you know, you wouldn't build it without doing that. But, you know, the building code's gone up in California, right? We keep raising the insulation. And you can't get enough insulation in a wall with insulation between the studs to meet the code. So you pretty much have to put rigid foam on the outside anyway, just to meet the building standard.
Even if it's a 2x6 wall?
I think, no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because that changes. Anybody know what the minimum R value of a wall is? You know, what's funny is Jim, you guys know Jim Cunningham, you got him? So Jim and I started building about the same time in the 70s. And in California, we've had 2x4 walls forever. But he still builds with 2x4 walls. He just likes that. He doesn't like 2x6 walls. But I took a break from California and I lived in Maine for 10 years. And nobody in the north where it's cold ever built a 2x4 wall because, you know, it wouldn't matter what the building department said, it's just too damn cold. You can't get enough insulation, you know. So in Maine, they've always had 2x6 walls. And I would tell Jim, when he hired on, I said, you know, you should teach people to do 2x6 walls. And he said, well, the 2x4 are cheaper, but now you can't get enough insulation in 2x4. So if you stick with a 2x4, which is fine, then you have to put some kind of rigid foam on the outside. Yeah.
Just a question, now that you said that you start building that in the 70s, what would the plaster on top of the sheetrock back in the day?
No, they weren't doing plaster very much even in the 70s.
Because I've demoed a bunch of houses, so
Yeah.
there's some bathrooms and they used to plaster and then sheetrock and then the studs.
The sheetrock and then plaster over the, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, they did it before, like in the,
60s,
no, yeah, 50s and earlier. Then they got sort of streamlined in the 50s after the war, they stopped doing it, except if it was a high-end home with a wealthy home, you know, then that look of plastic sometimes looks they think looks nicer than just the flat, no texture of the sheetrock, and they would go back to that. So now they even go back and they add these Italian, there's all kinds of things they've imported from Italy of plaster, really beautiful plaster, very expensive.
So it was just for roofs?
Just for looks, yeah, it doesn't add much to the insulation.
Minimum R value right now is a R21 for 2x6s, R13 for 2x4 walls.
That's funny they have that.
Yeah. That's after Title 24 in 2020.
Yeah, 2020, that's the most recent bill. We've got a new one, but it doesn't take, it's just starting, so.
Yeah, that's the one that makes it so we have to.
Yeah,
hook
but
up
isn't that
solar
weird?
and all that.
Yeah.
Separating 2x6 and 4, they should just have a minimal wall.
Yeah.
Like,
They should.
wait, what did you say for the 2x6 R
R21,
and the 2x4 was?
R13.
Yeah, see, it's been R13 for a long time, so I wouldn't know if it's done up. They've been inching it up, but R13.
So you think they would still accept that? Like on a new construction?
Yeah, and what's happened is they found a way to tweak the fiberglass with a little bit more. Like another 1 or 2 R values, and that's what the code is based on. There's a 2x4 installation. That's what we needed. But that's minimal, you know, if a 2x6 is R19, that's really what we want. You know?
Yeah.
We'll look at different ways of, I mean, we're talking about insulation tonight, so we'll look at different things. Look at some of the cold. When I lived in Maine, they did all kinds of stuff. They did envelope houses, which are double wall, but they have the air can go all between the 2 walls. Those are really great. They're very expensive. But it's all envelope, the ceiling and the wall, so there's a separation. And then double wall, which they mentioned in a couple of books I'm gonna talk about tonight. We did that in Maine. So you do a 2x4 and a 2x4 and separate them by anywhere from 3 to 6 inches. And then you'd have to put plywood to span those, because you'd fill them with insulation, you'd spray in, not wet foam, but dry insulation, but it would be a foot thick of insulation. And so, but you're building twice as many walls, right? Double walls. But, you know, they always complain about that. But, you know, that's the fastest part of the house is the wall. It's so simple, you know? And we used to just put those up. I didn't do a lot of it. We did some. We used to put those up and cut the plywood. It's not a big deal, and it saves. It's actually one of the cheaper ways to do it.
Would it be 2 bottom plates? You know,
We would do 2 bottom plates, and I just was looking at an entry in the net zero book I thought, which I'll share with you later, and they were saying they were putting plywood across the bottom. But then you have to raise them both together, or you put one in with the wide thing and toenail the other to it, which is kind of silly. But I don't know why they do that, because the bottom has to be insulated, but that's a function of your basement or your crawl space, and that's another whole separate area. But I always thought, when the ones we did in Maine, I hadn't been in adobe houses before that. I did work in New Mexico after that, and worked on a lot of adobe houses before, and I was really surprised how quiet that foot insulation of houses are. And adobe houses are that way too. They're very quiet and so really nice. I live in a city, it's really nice to cut out that same. I mean, and those also are they get rid of the thermal. They create thermal grid, right? Because the walls are separated and there's just insulation between them, so there's no way the heat can go through that from one step to another. That's really why we did it, was for thermal break, and then we like, well, let's just load it up with insulation while we're at it. I really like those. The envelope houses were really great too. I never built one, but I went to some in Maine in the winter, up in the north of Maine, just to visit, because I was teaching sustainable stuff even back then in the 80s. And those houses were so warm that they would have a garden inside. They would have a little area for a garden. And they would have trees like banana trees and plants all year round in the Maine winter. If the house was so, it's surprising. You walk in out of the snow and there's this, garden going all around. So those are great. I think as food becomes more scarce, it might become more scarce. Well, it will eventually, but you're just worried about your lifetime right now. But the Colorado rivers, we're draining the rivers pretty good now, right? The Colorado doesn't make it to the Gulf of Mexico anymore, once in a while. The Rio Grande doesn't make it to El Paso a lot now, because they've got farms and ranches and Indian reservations and cities all becoming more populated and drawing from these places, and there's just not enough water. Like right now, Arizona and Colorado and California and Nevada are all negotiating because they all take water from the Colorado River. And it's kind of been a California versus the other, because we take most of them for our agriculture. And so that's becoming an issue. But it'll just get worse as we get more drought, right? So, so having food, we'll have to figure out local ways to do it, right? And not big agricultural things. We don't have the water. So maybe, so there's gonna be more urban, growing, it's called urban agriculture, urban, horticulture, where they grow, they're growing things inside now with lights. They found LED lights that really mimic sunlight, and they're growing any kind of plant in dark inside spaces now with lights. Pretty phenomenal. And they're growing on buildings. You see in vertical agriculture, and restaurants have places on them. So we're putting places actually on buildings and high rises all around the world. Because they're trying to get food much more, food out of that area. They can't rely on big farming areas because they're, with that inside stuff, that's really fascinating. I try to keep up with it, but you can dictate the conditions there, right? The weather doesn't affect it. So you can dictate the water, the temperature, and the light. Pretty interesting. That may be where we go. With global warming, also the temperature's rising and going north, right? So a lot of things can't be growing in the same place. It would be too hot pretty soon. Maybe not in your lifetime, but definitely in 20, 30 years, you'd be allowed to do it for lunar. The population will be moving north because the middle tropics would be too hot to live or grow in. So when you have an inside thing where you control the climate, even if it's hot outside, you can still grow. So anyway, this was an aside from one of these houses, but it's really interesting to go into a place in the winter, someplace, and see things growing in usable agriculture. Okay. When heat radiates to a wall, the drywall, then it conducts from the drywall. When it's not going into a stud, it's going into either an empty wall or a wall of insulation. Now, if the wall was empty in Southern California, they didn't used to insulate houses. Wasn't that far back when they realized they sort of started to need to do that. Natural gas was so cheap that it didn't matter. We weren't losing any money, so why worry about it? They would have radiators. When I grew up in West LA, we had radiators on the wall. I think I mentioned that before. But the heating was minimal, and there was no insulation in the wall. So what happens is when heat goes through the sheetrock, then it radiates across that space. Then there's no matter to conduct it. Just empty space, then it radiates again. So it will radiate to the other side of the wall and then conduct out of the top there. So when we put insulation in a wall, we stop the radiation because there's something in the way. It can't radiate. And we slow the conduction because the warm air goes into the insulation, there's air pockets, and the convection will stop too. We slow it, we don't stop it. You can't stop these things, but you can slow them down. When you slow heat from leaving the house, that's good for your cost of heating, right? You don't have to heat as much. So we're not getting to the point where we can have no heat, but we're getting to the point where we slow it down so much that it doesn't leave fast enough to make up heat we do constantly and night. We're going to look at some things. When it convects, the hot air rises, right? Does anybody know why hot air rises?
Because it's trying to get cold.
Is it less dense?
Technically, that's true. It's trying to get cold.
Yeah.
There's another way to look at it.
Is it less dense?
Yeah. When it heats, the molecules go apart, right? So there's not as much matter per square foot for gravity to hold it down. So it tends to go up. But it's the same idea. It goes from hot to cold. So that happens in a house, and it creates cycles. Because once it gets up, then it cools off and comes back down, and it creates a cycle in the house. But the bad thing is if it goes in a wall and does that. So we're going to look at things that happen in a wall, convection loops, and it happens in windows too. This is side view of a 2x4 wall, okay? And you've got sheet rock. Is this big enough for everybody? And you've got fiberglass. Now, this is a symbol for fiberglass, but it doesn't really show you what it looks like. But it's really just, you know, fiberglass. The way we used to staple it on a window was we take the flap and we put that against the stud on the front. We're looking down at it. Is the camera picking this up? Okay.
It's pretty decent.
We put the flap of that insulation here. And we staple it like that into the inside the stud. Yeah. And then when the sheetrocker came around, you could see the end of that stud and you'd know where to nail his rock, right? But what happened is this space here, it's like 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. There's nothing from floor to the top. And so what happens, the heat goes into the wall and heat goes from hot to cold, like Dan was saying. And so the coldest place in that wall is the upper plate. And so when the heat goes in, it just doesn't even go through the insulation, it just makes it upturn and goes right to the upper plate. So you're losing all that insulation ability. It's not being used at all. So the way we did that was like not insulating the houses. So, I mean, it was handy and we thought that's what the flaps were for and everybody did it. People still do it, but it's really not a good way. We're gonna go out and when we go out after break, we look at how to do it. The thing is, if you take this flap and you put it there and nail like you're supposed to, and you take the other flap and nail it, all you see is paper across there, so the sheetrocker doesn't know where the studs are. So that's expecting more of them if they haven't changed over. So you can draw lines, or they can do it. They can just go and find the stud and draw lines for the guys who are nailing, and that's all it takes. They don't like it. Sheetrocking. So anybody here sheetrock? I mean, totally. It's such a time thing, right? It's a pretty simple process, so you know, you've got to really get in there and get out. You can't waste time. So if you have to do something else, and I'll show you something else we're gonna ask them to do too, some clips for the drywall. Somebody get to pay people more, it's gonna take them more to do it. And people figure out ways to do that. You know, windows do the same thing. When heat gets into a window, it'll do a convection loop also. And one of the ways they stopped that was, you've heard of them, you know, the space now, double panes, pretty much. You can't do a single pane in California by code. And the double pane used it, initially had air in it, and then they started putting gases in it, like argon and they would stop the air from, they would stop the convection loop. That's what they did, and squeeze a little bit more R value out of the window. You know, think about windows, we'll talk about this a lot, is you know, a lot of times you have a nice view for the window, right? Or you want sunlight to come in, either way, most of us, you can't afford a great view, but we do like the sunlight to come in. And so, but it's also a heat sink, right? The heat will go out of it at night. So we really worked hard in the last 30, 40 years to make windows more efficient. And so adding argon gas to it's one way, little ways they try to do it. They've made the things that hold the glass. They used to be metal, they used to be aluminum, and the heat just goes right through the aluminum. But now they're making wood and fiberglass and things that slow down the heat more. So they just look at windows, they said, my God, you know, how can we have, passive solar heating with light coming in the window if the window it's so cold, it just leaks out heat at night, so they work on them, and they've come up, we'll talk about this, we've got a whole unit on windows, but they've come up with these far coatings, they spray these metallic, so it's just, they're so small, they don't look like metal, they're little tiny microscopic plates, but they sometimes do, color the wall or shade it a little. If you get one next to another one, like if you open one of these windows, the view straight out without a window is a little bit brighter than the window, because that E coating cuts down your visual light a little bit, it's slightly darker. So there's a balance there you have to watch too. We'll talk about that when we get to the video. So go down to heat leaks, the next topic. So there's two ways heat leaks, from conduction through the walls, which we've been talking about, right? Which insulation and thermal breaks get addressed. And then there's also just air that's been heated in your house that just goes out from the holes in the house. You lose a lot of heat that way too. So you want to have good insulation, you also want to make sure all the holes are plugged up.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What's the difference between radiation and conduction? It's like between gas molecules.
Well, so radiation, radiation's a photon, it's not really a gas molecule.
Okay, it's like
Yeah. It's a little piece of energy that comes out of the thing above. And then when it hits something, it causes the molecules to jiggle, so the heat starts there. The radiation is technically not heat itself, but it causes heat when it hits something. And the gas molecules are just, when they move, it's conducting. Yeah. So I used to show films in my green building, and if we really get bored sometime, I'll do it. Green building would have a Saturday going field trips. And if it wasn't good to go on a field trip, I wouldn't have one, and we'd look at the film. And it was a film that Nova, you know, the science show, Nova Public Television, they make a lot of science movies for the public. They had one on how the sun makes energy. And we've learned a lot about the sun, because we used to send, you know, satellites up, and they would get closer to the sun, but they would use light in the cameras. And now they start using sound. You can use anything that, you know, bounce off something, you can tell what shape it's bouncing off. And they've learned a ton more about the sun. Probably this one that just went up, this thing that's cooking the universe right now, probably give us even more. But they figured out from the results of the data that the little photon, the little piece of energy, start in the middle of the sun. The sun's got 3 layers. Start in the middle, and it takes them 10,000 years. 10,000 years to get from the middle to the edge of the sun. That's not even leaving the sun. It's the most mind-blowing film. You look at it and go, my God, it's just insane. Then it takes like a month to get through the outer layer, and then it takes 9 minutes to go from the outer layer to Earth. These little photons. 10,000 years, a month, and then 9 seconds.
Was it like imploding or what?
Well, we don't know much about them. Quantum physics has been studying for years, and it's kind of a mystery still. The fact that they can stay energized for 10,000 years is pretty remarkable, right? What the hell does that? So it's just in that realm that we're just starting to learn about, and it's pretty mind-boggling. And this movie, if we have time, I'll show it sometime. At least I'll tell you how to access it. Really interesting. So the leaks are the conduction through thermal bridging. If you don't have anything covering the studs, you get convection in the wall cavity because the insulation is not properly put in. And then you get air leaks through holes in the building. You know, plumbers put pipes in, electricians have service entrances. They don't make a real careful hole. You just try to bigger than they need. And they don't do anything. It's up to you to seal it. You have to go find it and seal it. There's a million things that penetrate a house. Building science and building performance, that's their job, is to figure out what all those are. So Next week, we're gonna do a blower door test. And the week after, we're gonna talk about sealing, you know, we'll look at all the techniques of sealing things, the caulking and all kinds of things. And there's different size holes and there's different ways to,
I have seen on my house a lot of air leak on the door reveals
where the door is,
in the door.
yeah.
So it's this something that should be sealed with
Yeah,
something?
yeah. Now, you know, most houses today, you go to Home Depot and you buy a pre-hung outside door. And its weather stripping is pretty good and it doesn't seems a lot, mine's been there 20 years and there's nothing. The bottom sometimes, if a houses shift, you know, the foundation is not always tight and they'll lean a little bit. Mine's leaned a few degrees. What that does is it makes the bottom not square. So if you look at the bottom of your door, sometimes there'll be a little triangle that's letting air in. And they make those sweeps, you know, that grab the door with metal and they have a little rubber thing on the bottom. And those sweeps can go at angles. So we'll look at that. I'll show you what those are when we get to that point. And so you can adjust those to fit if the house is leaning, it's that little gap, you can adjust those to stop that. But when I was telling you about weatherization, that was the beginning of building performance back in years past. The weatherproofing around doors and windows is a really big part of what they do. And, you know, we don't think about it now because the windows are so much better and the doors are better, the outside doors, you usually don't need to do too much. But if you have an older house where the door may have been hung as like an interior door, they put the jamb up separately and then they hung the door. That could be not weather stripped properly. And we'll look at that. We'll look at pictures of weather stripping here. That's, you know, a lot of this stuff is pretty simple and not very expensive to do. So, and the blower door test that we're going to do is what discovers where those leaks are. So you could, when the house is depressurized and air wants to come in to balance it out, it'll come in all the holes. So if you hold a smoke stick or a piece of incense or a cigarette, the bottom of your door, you'll see the smoke blow in and go, aha. So yeah, that's how you would find out if your weather stripping is not functioning. It's a great tool because that's exactly what it does. Finds all of them. So then that gets into detection practice. So leaks, you know how things leak, and then we want to know where they leak. So then we do a blower door test. That's on number 4 here. We do an infrared camera scan. They usually do them in conjunction with a blower door test. And you can see through the walls, and you can see the heat configuration in the wall with an infrared camera. So you just see heat. So if you've got insulation that's down a couple inches, the insulation will be red because it's trapping heat, so it's warm. And the part that's not insulated, the heat's just going through that, so it doesn't stop, so that's blue. You can just see all the blue escapes in the wall going, whoops, that's not done very well. And if it's really bad, you might want to even re-insulate, you know. We're going to look at that tonight. They learned so much about how insulation is done poorly that finally, in the last 5 years, the government's put it into the building code that now there's different scales of insulation, you know, good, poor, good, and great, or even something like that. And if you don't have the top one, you have to redo it. So they look at your insulation before you see the wall. And if you have gaps, I'll show you pictures. There's pictures on our handout. If you have gaps, they'll tell you to redo it. You can't cover that because it is probably in the leak that was on there. Yeah, so remediation, that just means how to fix it. Obviously, you plug the holes, you insulate properly. You cover thermal bridges if you can. If it's a new house, you can, but it's an old house. Okay. Any questions about that? I think you asked a lot of them. So heat's a little bit more complex than we go into your handout and toward the back. you'll see a picture of a wall. It says 90 at the top. They're not numbered in sequence, but it does say 90 at the top. Looks like that. Everybody see that? So the top one is a grade 2. You can see that a couple of things, there's gaps at the top, a couple of them, of the bats. They call that kind of insulation that goes in a wall of bats. Some of those bats didn't make it all the way up. One of them got maybe torn in the installation on the right there. And then look at the grade 3 at the bottom below it. The gaps are huge. They wouldn't accept that. They would say redo that. And then on the page before, somewhere, I think it's the page before, on figure 4.5B. Oh no, that's not it. I'm sorry. It looks like bats, but that's blowing in. I don't have a picture of the good wall, but the good wall, the grade 1 would just be.
You do,
I do?
yeah, it's 4.6A.
4.6. Oh, yeah, thank you. You're right. It was lighter, so big math, yeah. It just got one little gap, you know, so you might let that go. But, it's basically, there are no gaps, the insulation covers. And they say it's gotta be six sides, front, back, sides, top and bottom, all have to touch wall. So if they're not, then it's incomplete. So that's the new standard. Now, with advanced framing, this is one of my pet peeves. And they got two-sided ones. I tell you. So we'll talk about this now because it has to do with those convection loops. So this is
Focus.
you
It's out of focus.
it's out of focus.
Yeah. Fix it.
Put your hand under for a second.
I think, yeah.
How out of focus? I can't see me, but I can see the. Oh, how weird.
Put your hand in front of it for like 2 seconds.
How long has it been? How long has it been out of focus? Well, you know, beyond. It could be because I started now and then. I gotta figure it out. So this is looking down at a corner of 2 walls. Yeah. And when you look at an end piece of wood, they put an X on it. So you know that's the end of it. That's the top of the sled. And these are the plates here. So what they used to do is put a, say it's a 2x6, they put another 2x6 here. And because it's 1.5 inches, it would stick down past that other wall. And then your insulation you could put here and nail into that. And then you'd have that to nail that way. But what happens with that is when you put the insulation in, sort of like that. You know, even though it's fiberglass, it's still kind of, you know, has an edge to it. And the insulation is like this. And when it comes, then it kind of, you're kind of squishing it against that nailer, right? You're squishing against this, and then when the nailer is no longer there, it goes against the drywall there. But then it can't, you know, it's not flexible enough to go into that corner. So you have this triangle here. So what do we say about triangles that go from plate to plate? The warm air goes into them and straight up. So the warm air could even come through here and go to there. There's a little bit of room in front and then out. So that, even though you're putting more insulation in, they used to do a corner with. Danny probably knows about this. They put blocks in there. So it's a 3-member corner, and then you would have room for nailings. But that allows no insulation, right? Or sometimes the blocks, between the blocks, it's stuck fiberglass. If you stuff fiberglass, it compresses it, does no good at all. So this was out, and they went to this. They said, well, if we do this, we can get more insulation. But then they didn't figure on that little convection channel. So now what we want to do, well, this is part of the this is part of the advanced framing discussion. They do nothing, it's those two. The wall just has an end stud on each side. And then you go, well, the insulation on nail in there, but it's just gonna hang there. Well, no, because now they have little clips. And I forgot to bring the clip. I never find it in the way I think of it now. Tim's rearranged everything, I don't know where everything is, so I can't. I think it might be in a shed, I'll look at it for you. But you put a clip and I can't remember which way to nail it. I don't have the clip with me. Either nails from the front or I've got them. What it does, it sticks out. And so you take this piece of insulation, drywall, and you put it against that, you just push it against that clip, and then you put the second piece. This has studs, so you can nail it. You just can't nail it where the clip is, so it'll be there. And then you put the adjacent piece on, and you push it against that. You push it right up tight to that, and it pins that in there so it can't move. And then you can take across it. Now, someone was asking me, because there's possibly a little more movement, that there might be cracks in that. I think somebody here asked that. And I don't know. Over time, I don't know if that does it or not. They, to get the maximum insulation in the wall, that's the best way to do it. And also it saves wood, right? Saving a couple of foot. It's significant price of wood. Right?
Everyone's gonna put everything in front of it.
Okay, let's finish this. Let's finish this handout and then we'll do a break and then we'll look at the front after.
Yeah, you need to cover it. Like, you need
We'll do another 5 or 10 minutes, take a break, go out and work on the installation and then come back and do the video and so
Simple man in the field trying to make a living. I don't know how to use cameras.
So this next section after the heat transfer sheet is insulation fundamentals. We'll do that right at the very beginning. So
Cover it.
how many of you don't know much about insulation at all because we haven't been doing that in the building? Okay, so the most common type of insulation in the house is a fiberglass bat, which we're gonna do out in the middle. That's just fiberglass in a long sheet. So they have 8-foot pieces that go on 8-foot walls and you buy a whole one from, or they have a roll, same stuff that they put in a roll, in case you have 10-foot walls and then you cut it, helps them cut it. So bats come into a roll or a bat straight. And then you have loose insulation that will blow in for the top. And that can be cellulose, which is wood paper crumbled up, or it can be fiberglass in a form that would blow in. So they use those. They use that a lot for if a house doesn't have any insulation and they want to go put it in later. You can put holes But they have to be in each bay every 16 inches, so if you have access to it on the inside, you can do it that way. Or you can take piece of siding off on the outside, if the inside's got too many cabinets and stuff, can't get through the wall. The outside, you can take a piece of, or if it's stuck, you can even drill through that and patch it. More work, and then blow it from the outside. But you have to go in each bay, right, because they're separated. So what goes in one won't go to the next one. So they do that, and you can have different pressures, so if there's different density. And that's pretty good. It's as good as the bats. And then now they have the spray foam, right? The polyurethane foam, open and closed cell. And that's got one of the highest R values, the closed cell. And it's also an air vapor barrier too. So that's really great in terms of, here we don't need an air vapor barrier. It's not that cold that we have to stop it. Hot air, we don't want the panic to stop the hot air. In cold places, we do. So you have to put a physical barrier like a plastic in the hole inside against the wall to keep the moist air from going into the wall. In cold climates, if moist air goes into the wall, you know, your moist, warm air from inside your house, if it gets into the wall, the coldness from the outside, it's so cold, it comes into your wall. And it, right in the middle of your wall, it hits that warm air, and guess what it does? It condenses. And so that water vapor turns into water, and it falls right in your wall. That wrecks your insulation, and it can rot the floor plate. So in cold climate, you really have to stop that moist, warm air from getting in your wall. The spray foam will do that. You just spray it. It costs more. It's the most expensive insulation, but it's got a high R value with 6 R per inch.
How much is that? My grandma has my grandma's house in LA was built in 1908. And it has, I don't think it has insulation.
Probably not.
It's cold. It's like when it's cold, it's cold. When it's hot, it's hot. How much would that cost? It's only like 1,000 square feet. What do you think that would cost to
I don't know. I can find out.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't priced it for a while and it changes, right?
Yeah.
But I can just call one of the guys.
Okay.
But then she'd have to put holes in to get it.
And you gotta patch
But
it.
But the cost of the blow would be quite a bit less, so I'll give you the price and the R value for each.
Okay.
And what makes sense.
Appreciate it.
Sure. So in attics, especially in Santa Barbara, in a lot of places, they have rock wool, which is that kind of dark gray. How would you describe that?
Kind of like a fiberglass mat, but just like.
Yeah,
not as-
yeah. And that's an industrial flag byproduct, and it's pretty cheap that way, and it's not bad, but that just comes in bags, and you just lay that out, you don't pressure, don't pump it in, you know. That, if you go into a lot of attics in Santa Barbara, you'll see that. And, but the new homes just put fiberglass down, it's simpler. And if you ever have to change it, you can just pull the fiberglass up, there's other stuff you have to double that, you have to, you know, spoon it out. So there's that company, was it Jacob, you were saying, the Rockwool? No,
The insulation company?
Yeah.
John Mansville?
yeah.
Yeah.
What's it called?
John Mansville?
No, but what's the product?
Uh,
No, it's not John Mansell,
Oh,
it's its own company,
oh,
and is it Rockwool? I'll remember it, but that's becoming a major thing. And it's not like a bat, it's not floppy like a bat, it's more solid, but it stays together, and you fit it in.
Oh, really? Like the
oh,
rigid
oh,
foam?
yeah,
And it's not even rigid, it's weird, it's a new kind of, but it's that same flag, it's the same Rockwool. You know, the guy that we show a lot of film, what's his name? Well, you've seen the one, the contractor that does a re-swing.
Rising Matt?
Yeah. He actually has a contract with the company, so he talks about it a lot of his film. He admits his